Okay, now we're going to move on to the main agenda again, and motion number 6, Peace, Progress and Equality. On behalf of the National Executive Council, calling Brian Camfield to propose the motion.
President, Conference, Brian Camfield on behalf of the Executive Council to propose motion 6. I'm going to say that the Good Friday Agreement was really an historic compromise in 1998, following decades of violence, death and destruction. And it was a recognition that the problems of Northern Ireland would only be resolved through dialogue, through mutual respect and building equality across all the community. But we're also promised in Northern Ireland a peace dividend. We were promised economic improvement that would redress the injustice of unemployment and social exclusion and deprivation. And despite in 1998 having the peace settlement, it has staggered from one crisis to another and has been threatened by various controversies relating to flags, decommissioning, symbols, marches, and a whole range of things. But who would have predicted that it was austerity that would pose the most deadly threat to the political institutions and to the peace process? Because that's the way in which it's shaping up at the moment. This motion indicates strong public sector and a social security system makes a critical contribution to equality. It's a major, public services are a major equaliser because it gives everyone equal access to the important things in life: health, education, social services, protection from the vagaries of the market. But public services are under attack. Peter Bunting has given you detail about what it means. Full detail is in the annual report. And what we're going to have on 8th of July, tomorrow, is a further 12 billion of cuts to social security, mainly targeted on those people who are in work and who receive tax credits. Another attack on our members, and we have to respond. We have responded in the lead up to the 13th of March strike, and we need to build for further action. But we need to build and increase the number of trade unions that have been involved in it, and we need to build as well across both the public and the private sector. The interesting thing is that austerity, as you see from Greece, has the potential of destroying the European Union. It has the potential of destroying, in a smaller scale, the Northern Ireland peace process. Conference, Northern Ireland isn't a sovereign country. It's neither fish, flesh nor fowl. We're being told and treated as if we're a separate country with all the powers of a sovereign country. We're being told to balance the books, that our public sector is too big, that we need to increase the private sector and develop the private sector, and that we really need to get off our dependency on public services. But if you look at across other parts of the UK, it's clear that Northern Ireland isn't significantly out of kilter with those other under-deprived regions of the UK. They're very much like Northern Ireland. The Irish government, this motion says, has a critical role to play in forcing the British government to recognise that its austerity policies are likely to bring down the peace process, are likely to bring down the political institutions. And I suppose there's another comparison analogy with the Greek situation, in that they're saying on the one hand to Syriza and to the Greek people, you have to take your medicine, you have to get on with it. And that smugness that the President John Douglas referred to, our Irish politicians saying that the Greek people have to get on with it because if we did it, they did it. And to some extent, that has been the attitude of the coalition government in the Republic of Ireland to the negotiations that were taking place up in Belfast immediately prior to Christmas. Comments like, you need a dose of austerity yourselves, from some of the ministers, and absolutely no sympathy that Northern Ireland has an independent case for no austerity. But we're not arguing for special treatment. We know that there are areas in Britain as well that deserve much better treatment, and we recognise our responsibility to build an anti-austerity movement, not only in Northern Ireland, but right across Britain, because this problem isn't solvable within the context of Northern Ireland. We need to build in Northern Ireland, and we need to take a stand against the cuts that are taking place in Northern Ireland. And like it or not, that is going to bring us into conflict in some shape or form with our Assembly, because we think that the elements of the Good Friday Agreement, for instance, the way in which £700 million is going to be invested in the rundown of public services, in around 20,000 redundancies for public servants, using a reinvestment and reform initiative to actually borrow money to reduce public services, doesn't seem to us in the trade union movement as a sensible way forward. And neither do we accept the case for a reduction in corporation tax. Now, we know that some people make the arguments that we're only seeking the power. That doesn't mean to say that we're seeking a reduction in corporation tax. But unfortunately, these things take a momentum of their own. And once the Assembly gets the power to reduce corporation tax, make no mistake about it, there will be pressure built up which will be almost inescapable to reduce the rate of corporation tax. Instead of targeting funding and finances at developing business, at developing research, and develop investment and economic development, what they're in fact doing by a reduction in corporation tax is giving a free handout to business. They are under no obligation to do anything about it. In fact, the facts, even as developed by and produced by PricewaterhouseCoopers in a report a number of years ago, they did a survey of businesses and firms, particularly in relation to foreign direct investment, and the rate of corporation tax was 17th in the list of factors which companies found it important whenever they were making decisions to invest. 17th. And yet we're told, certainly by our business lobby in Northern Ireland, that it's the only solution to Northern Ireland's economic problems. Conference, we recognise that the major problem in relation to public expenditure, in relation to austerity, in relation to the threat to the political institutions and arrangements in Northern Ireland, in relation to the threat to the peace process, lies with Westminster. But unfortunately, we also recognise that elements of the Stormont House Agreement are totally unacceptable to us, and that they were and are within the gift of our local politicians. Conference, I ask you to support this motion to demonstrate that the trade union movement in the whole of this island is concerned about the political arrangements and stability in Northern Ireland, and that we make a major point of putting pressure on both the British government, but in particular on the Irish government, to ensure that it plays its role to safeguard peace in Northern Ireland and to safeguard the future prosperity of the people. I move the motion.
I'd like to call on Patricia McKeown on behalf of the National Executive Council to second the motion, please.
Thank you, President. Delegates, Patricia McKeown, unison moving or seconding the motion on behalf of the Executive Council. We have 17 wasted years, and if we had risen to the challenges, then a child born on the day we said yes to the Good Friday Agreement would be living in a better world today. Instead, we have 17 years of unstable government. We have had 7 of those years constant suspensions of the Assembly. We have a Good Friday Agreement, which was a complex proposition put to the people, and more than 80% of us voted and 72% of us said yes, and that included majorities in the Nationalist, Republican and Unionist communities. And we are today in a worse position than we were 17 years ago. We're in a worse position in many respects, from life expectancy for the poorest people, to premature death rates, to a tax on our public services and a tax on our welfare system. But as Mick O'Reilly said this morning, that motion we carried needs to be nuanced for the North, because it is not a simple situation of orange and green. Our government is elected by us, the people. it doesn't function properly. And it doesn't function properly for one primary reason. The largest party refuses to accept the Good Friday Agreement and consequently dismisses all of the promises on equality and human rights. Those promises which would have delivered to us today civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. That party, the DUP, came into government in 2007 post the St Andrews Agreement. It said, there's an agreement we accept. But within the last few weeks, our allies, the CAJ, our human rights NGO, has had to go to court, take judicial review for the failure of our government to produce, as required by the St Andrews Agreement, an anti-poverty strategy. It has broken the law by not producing an anti-poverty strategy, and we haven't got one because it is resisted by the DUP. 4 years ago, the Irish Congress of Trade Unions mounted its campaign in the north against austerity. We in particular highlighted the dangers to our society of proposed welfare cuts. 3 political parties in our government agreed and came on side: Sinn Féin, the SDLP, and the Green Party. The other 3 parties in government, with various degrees of dogmatic response, rejected it, the strongest rejection coming from the DUP. In another world, that might be straightforward left-right politics, but it's not another world, it's where we live, in a complex situation with a difficult political setup and a government that can't function properly unless real pressure is brought to bear. And where should that pressure come from? It should come from the co-signatories of the Good Friday Agreement, the Irish government and the British government. And what did they do last December? Well, what did they do in 2007, indeed, when both governments changed? They walked away from us. They stopped exerting pressure to ensure that the commitments made to the people on equality and human rights were put into operation. And instead, we have the British government deciding to impose austerity and using the fact of a political crisis in the north to do that. And that is not only immoral, I think history will prove that that's one of the big mistakes of Irish history. The Irish government backed the proposal to cut our welfare system. That is an outrage. We need the Irish government to exert pressure on the British government to make sure that the Good Friday Agreement and the St Andrews Agreement are both implemented, and that the rights and the future of the people we represent are protected in the way that we were promised they would be protected. Peter's already outlined, as has Brian, the fact that our movement is resisting at every turn the attempt to deconstruct our welfare state. And there is no doubt that that is what the Tory government wants to do. But there is also a part of our own government that wants to do that. But that is not the view of the people who elect it. So in the complex situation we live in, we also, as a movement, have to exert pressure on all of the parties that form our enforced coalition. And I can tell you that in my own union, members who vote DUP, union activists who vote DUP, have been doing precisely that. Some of them are in that delegation with us today. And they have been exerting pressure on the people they vote for. They're entitled to vote for them, but they're also entitled that the people they vote for respect their wishes. And we know from all the polling done that everybody who votes for all of the political parties in the North, all the main parties who form the government, the majority of the electorate, 80% plus, have exactly the same message for our government. We want equality and human rights. We want them protected, and we want them now. And unfortunately, there are those who choose to divert the people's attention away from the real issues. In another 24 hours or less, a UK Chancellor will produce a budget that is likely, if it goes ahead as predicted, to hit us with another £1 billion worth of cuts immediately, plunge another 2,000 families in Northern Ireland into poverty, take £40 a week of another significant section of our working population, and cause further chaos. And we, the movement, must make sure that we are not having our attention diverted again by the raising of sectarianism. There's been a refusal by our current government to do an equality impact analysis of what will happen if those welfare cuts come in. They did a partial analysis, but they left out something key. They didn't analyse what the impact would be on the grounds of religion or religious belief or political opinion. They said they didn't know. We said, give us the addresses, we'll tell you the answer to that. Because the truth of the matter is that the patterns of discrimination in the North have not changed in 50 years, and the areas of greatest disadvantage are still the areas of greatest disadvantage, and the biggest hit will be on the poorest of the Catholic population. And because we live in a place that refuses to accept equality and human rights at its core, we have growing working class Protestant disadvantage. We in the movement say, we're not taking any more of that. We'll continue to stand up. And if that means that our government falls because some people stand up and do the right thing, so be it. We will continue to fight.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Okay, motion 6. Any speakers on motion 6? Yes? The speaker motion 6, yeah? Yeah, well, certainly, yeah. Sorry, pardon.
Yeah, okay. Conference, Jeanette Murdoch on behalf of NIPSA to offer qualified support for the motion. And the qualification comes really in the first line where it says Congress endorses the anti-austerity campaign. Conference, I'm sorry to tell you, but at this moment in time there is no anti-austerity campaign in the North. We had a great campaign up until the 13th of March. Reps put their reputation on the line. We promised our members it wouldn't be another November the 30th when we march everybody up to the top of the hill and we leave them there. We promised them it wouldn't be one day of action, that it would be a campaign, it would be sustained, and we would fight for their jobs and our society. Unfortunately, Conference, we took our foot off the pedal, and in the mouth of a campaign or in the mouth of a general election. To be honest, Conference, that's unforgivable, and we need to look hard and study the mistake that was made there. But we can come back from it, we can build, and I would look to all the unions in the room to come together, to work out a campaign that supports our members, supports our communities, where they are going to face the hits that are coming down the line at us. We need to make sure that we are totally behind our community and our members, and that we take it forward in a wholehearted campaign to defend what we have and keep our society. Conference, please support the motion, but go out from here and take it forward and have a sustained campaign. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
President, delegates, guests, brothers and sisters, Paddy Michael, Belfast Trades Council, to speak in support of motion number 6. Comrades, if Greece has a specific message for workers across Europe and for unions in every state and country, it is this: your voice is important. You can make a difference. Standing together, workers are stronger. Fighting together, we can take on the dirty, rotten, tax-avoiding, tax-evading, neoliberal capitalist parasites and their apologists and supporters. There is an alternative. There is an alternative. What we stand for is that alternative. When the Stormont House Agreement was published and the Stormont Castle Agreement was leaked, the trade union movement in the North came together to develop a strategy of opposition, particularly to the financial and economic aspects of those agreements. Unions, trades councils, and the Belfast Office of Congress organised dozens of public meetings in cities, towns, and villages. I'd like to place on record from this platform our appreciation for the hard work and dedication of Peter Bunting throughout that period. Quite often, union and Congress officials are dismissed simply as bureaucrats. Let me tell you, Peter Bunting was out doing public meetings, 2 to 3 meetings every night, every week, from January to March, until that March 13th strike. That is to be commended, and he should be commended for it on behalf of this movement. Comrades, it would be extremely misleading and factually wrong, and Jeanette covered that point earlier, to suggest that we have won any battle against austerity in the North. We haven't. But what we have done is we have given confidence to ordinary workers to stand up, to take to the streets. We have rejuvenated the movement in some areas, including in the community and voluntary sectors. We have provided the space for young trade unionists to again feel part of this aging movement. In many cases, they have shown the vision to challenge complacency in some areas. Belfast Trades Council salutes those unions who took strike action on the 13th of March, and those same unions and others who have also taken action short of strike action over the last number of months. But comrades, more is obviously needed. If we're to defeat the Tory-imposed austerity, welfare cuts and attack on public services, if we're to defeat the Assembly-imposed job cuts and fetish around corporate welfare in the form of corporation tax reductions for big business, if we are serious about taking on those anti-worker, ideologically driven social re-engineering experiments, we need to hold our nerve. We need to work across unions to encourage a coordinated and a sustained response. This needs to include further strikes. It needs to include other actions, protests. It needs to include engagement with political parties, and also critically developing links and joint strategies with our brothers and sisters in the Welsh, Scottish and TUC. We need to force the Irish government to deliver on their obligations as co-signatories and co-guarantors of the Belfast Agreement. As Podemos in Spain and the Syriza-led government in Greece and their powerful Oxy referendum campaign have demonstrated that people and ordinary workers can make a difference when they have the courage to stand up for themselves. El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. The people united will never be defeated. Support the motion.
Thank you, Paddy. Any other motions on, speakers on motion 6?
Seeing none, we'll move on to motion number 7.